Imagine sitting at your 25th birthday dinner, watching your adoptive parents smile as they slide legal papers across the tablecloth to disown you, telling you they only kept you for the government benefits. They thought they were destroying me. What they didn't know was that my biological family was sitting exactly 3 tables behind them, waiting for my signal. Welcome to Revenge Stories, where the cold truth always cuts deeper than betrayal. If you want to know how to stop letting toxic people pull the strings of your life and how to build boundaries that nobody can break, type the word boundaries in the comments right now. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on Revenge Stories so you never miss another masterclass in sweet, silent justice. My name is Paige Mercer, and I was exactly 25 years old the night my world split completely in two. The setting was a restaurant called Vanterre. It was the kind of establishment where the waiters moved with whispered reverence, where the tablecloths were bleached to a blinding white, and where conversations were carried out in low, calculated murmurs. I had never been taken there in my life. My mother, Diane Mercer, had chosen it. That should have been my very first clue. Diane did not spend money on me without a very specific, financial reason printed somewhere on the back of a receipt. That evening, she wore her gray cashmere, the premium fabric she reserved strictly for high-stakes board meetings and funerals. My father, Wesley, walked half a step behind her, his leather portfolio tucked neatly under his arm like an accountant arriving at an audit. When we arrived, there was no banner. There was no balloon tied to my chair. No cake was waiting in the back kitchen with my name piped in blue frosting. For a landmark 25 birthday dinner, the table was strangely bare. The air between my parents possessed the careful, chilling politeness of a jury about to read a verdict. I had spent 4 years working as a paralegal at a high-end trusts and estates firm downtown. I knew the temperature of a deposition, and this room was freezing. So I did what I always do when a room goes cold. I studied my breathing, and I counted the exits. That was when I clocked the small brass number standing on the table behind us and to the left, table 9. I held that number in my mind without quite knowing why. I set my own item down beside my water glass, a thin, plain manila folder. My mother glanced at it, assuming it was a resume or a simple birthday card. She had absolutely no idea what I had put inside it. To understand why I wasn't surprised by the coldness of that restaurant, you have to understand what birthdays looked like in the Mercer household. When I was small, my birthday consisted of one single candle. Not one candle as a beautiful, minimalist family tradition, but a lone, melting wax digit pressed into a grocery store cupcake that my mother had bought on her way home from work. She would leave it sweating on the kitchen counter while she took corporate phone calls. Meanwhile, 3 weeks later, my cousin Brett would get a rented bounce house, a magician, and a gourmet caterer serving miniature quiches on polished silver trays. Why? Because Brett belonged to my Aunt Renee and Brett was blood. I remember asking my mother, the year I turned 8, if I could have a real party too. My Aunt Renee was sitting on our sofa, drinking my mother's expensive wine, and she answered before my mother could. "We can only do one nice thing a month, honey," she said. She said it so kindly. That was the part that taught me the most about the world, how sweet and soft people can sound while they are explaining your small, insignificant size to you. So, I learned the cold mathematics of survival. One cheap cupcake costs less than a party. A child who asks for less is cheaper than a child who asks for the same. By the time I was 9, I entirely stopped asking for cake because I could see it made the arithmetic easier for everyone at the table. Being easy, being quiet, being invisible, that felt like the only currency I possessed. I left that house the exact week I turned 18 with nothing but 2 duffel bags and a community college acceptance letter I had filled out myself. Nobody drove me. I worked late-night shifts at a pharmacy counter and took classes at dawn. I transferred to the state university, finished my paralegal certification, and paid for every single credit hour by waiting tables on weekends. By 25, I was an expert at reading other people's wealth. I drafted the boring, hidden pages that decided everything: beneficiary designations, distribution schedules, the quiet language that controls who eats and who starves long after the funeral flowers have wilted. I could read a trust document the way some people read a human face. But the grand joke of my life was this: I could set a perfect legal boundary for a total stranger, but I could not ask my own family to want me. The only person I ever called from that family was my grandmother, Nana Ruth. Every Sunday at exactly 4 o'clock, like clockwork, my phone would ring. She was the only Mercer who answered the phone like she had been sitting by the receiver, praying for it to ring. When I was 12, crying bitterly in her kitchen because Cousin Brett had told me I wasn't a real Mercer, Nana Ruth took my chin in her weathered hand and said something I carried in my chest for 13 years. "You were chosen, sweetheart, not collected." Nana died when I was 23. I gave her eulogy, the only speech that mentioned her soul instead of the assets she left behind. Within a month of her funeral, my parents quietly moved out of their cramped suburban split-level house and into Nana's large, historic estate on Linden Road. But shortly after I turned 24, the Mercer family chat went incredibly quiet. Texts that used to take an hour for a reply now took 3 days. My mother completely stopped looping me into the holiday planning chains. My Aunt Renee, meanwhile, started using a very specific word in the family chat that she had never bothered with before: blood. "This is a blood-only weekend at the lake cabin," she would write. "The cabin only sleeps 8, and we want to keep it strictly to blood this year, Paige. You understand, right?" I did understand. I understood perfectly. I just didn't have the legal documents yet to know why the temperature had dropped so fast. Families drift, but this wasn't drift. This was a highly coordinated corporate extraction. So, when my phone lit up in March with my mother's name, her voice 3 degrees warmer than it had been in a year, I felt the small, icy click of a lock turning somewhere in the dark. "Honey," she purred, and she only ever called me honey when a contract needed to be altered. "We would love to take you out to celebrate your 25th birthday properly. The way we never quite managed when you were little." Every instinct I had built from analyzing fraudulent estate claims screamed the same thing: this is too neat. When Diane Mercer gets generous, it is because a spreadsheet somewhere has informed her that the generosity will yield a massive return. Back at the restaurant table at Van Ter, we ordered drinks before a single true thing was said. My mother praised the vintage wine list. My father told a mundane story about finding a parking spot. Then, somewhere between the bread basket and the main entrees, Diane folded her manicured hands and shifted into her corporate liquidation voice. "We've always done our very best for you, Paige," she began. Wesley nodded along right on cue, a half-second behind her, just as he had done for 30 years. "We gave you a roof. We gave you an education. More than some children in your position could ever dream of." I let her talk. I rested my hand flat on the manila folder beside my plate. I watched my father's anxious eyes flick down to the tab of the folder. I had covered the full label with my thumb, leaving only 2 typed letters visible: TR. I let him wonder. My mother took a calculated sip of her wine, set the glass down with absolute precision, and delivered the line she had undoubtedly practiced in her vanity mirror. "There is something, Paige, that you should have been told a very long time ago. You are adopted. We brought you home when you were an infant. You were never biologically ours." She paused, leaning forward, waiting for the devastating collapse. She wanted the sobbing girl. She wanted the theatrical shattering of my identity so she could cleanly sweep up the pieces and exit the restaurant. But I didn't break. Seeing that her words hadn't shattered me, she bared her teeth and delivered the real blow: "We only kept you for the benefits." She smiled when she said it. That smile was the ultimate gift she could have given me. A woman does not smile while destroying her daughter's life unless she has rehearsed the choreography of the cruelty. In that smile, I saw the true math. I hadn't been a daughter who disappointed them. I was an asset that had finished depreciating. My father, Wesley, looking thoroughly uncomfortable, tried to step in and explain it like an accountant defending a fraudulent tax shelter. There were state assistance payments in the early years. Paige, he muttered, refusing to look at my eyes. The adoption came with a substantial monthly government subsidy because of your background. Of course, that ran out when you were in grade school. But after that, there were significant tax write-offs. And, of course, there was your grandmother. He didn't say Nana's name. He just explained that Nana had severe expectations about family legacy, and adopting me had helped them meet those expectations. In his precise, professional words, it had been highly worthwhile for a good many years. I sat perfectly still as the arithmetic of my entire childhood rearranged itself into the true equation. The lone candle, the cheap cupcakes, the hand-me-down clothes from Cousin Brett that still had the return clearance tags on them. It wasn't because we were poor. They were actively pocketing the difference between what a state-subsidized child costs and what she generates. The subsidy has been gone for a long time, Paige, my mother interrupted, her voice snapping like a dry twig. And what came after it ends today? You are 25 now. There is simply nothing further that keeping you on does for our bottom line. You are no longer useful to us. With those two sentences, they reduced 25 years of my existence to a bankrupt product line. My father reached into his expensive leather portfolio and slid a crisp sheath of legal papers across the white tablecloth until the edge of the paper brushed against my dinner plate. We've already filed the formal paperwork, Wesley said, trying to sound legally sound. You are completely removed from our will. You will not be a beneficiary on any insurance, property, or accounts. We wanted to do this cleanly, in person, so there would be absolutely no confusion or litigation later. I picked up the document. It took me exactly 4 seconds to read the caption on the first page. And that was when I realized the absolute beauty of the night. They had filed against the entirely wrong instrument. They had spent thousands of dollars hiring an attorney to cut me out of their own modest, debt-ridden estate, while leaving completely untouched the massive legal document that actually decided everything. They had no idea what I knew. Suddenly, a voice piped up from my mother's open purse on the table. It was my Aunt Renee on speakerphone. Blood looks after blood, Paige. Renee's voice oozed through the speaker, warm as a knife in hot soup. You've always been a practical girl. You understand. My mother looked at me, growing visibly irritated because I wasn't crying. Aren't you going to say anything? She demanded. I looked past her cashmere shoulders. Farther back in the dining room, at table 9, under the soft amber lighting, a woman with my exact jawline turned her head toward us and went completely still. To explain what was resting inside my manila folder, I have to take you back exactly 6 months prior to the miraculous week when 2 envelopes arrived at my tiny apartment. The first envelope was from the State Adoption Reunion Registry. Inside was a letter written in beautiful, looping script. It was from a woman named Susan Hale. She wrote that she had been only 19 when she was forced to give me up. She wrote that she had thought about me every single March for 25 years. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote, I never stopped saving you a seat. The second envelope arrived 3 days later. Our state had recently passed a law allowing adult adoptees to access their original records upon turning 21. While I was pulling my original birth certificate from the county database, professional habit made me look up the public administration files of Nana Ruth's estate. And there it was, embedded deep within the distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, a trust executed 2 years before her death, administered completely by a corporate bank trustee, entirely out of my parents' reach. The clause read, The monthly caregiver and housing distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate abruptly upon the designated beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the entirety of the trust remainder shall pass directly to my granddaughter, Paige. 2 envelopes. One told me exactly where I came from. The other told me, in my grandmother's legally binding, notarized handwriting, exactly what my parents were about to lose and why they were suddenly in such a desperate hurry to get me to sign a waiver. They needed me to sign away my rights to Nana's trust before I realized that I was the landlord of the house on Linden Road. My mother, entirely oblivious to the economic bomb sitting in my folder, uncapped a heavy gold pen and pushed a signature page toward me. "It's just a standard acknowledgement form, Paige," she said smoothly. "Sign it, confirm you understand the disownment, and we can all have a civilized dinner before going our separate ways." I glanced at the text. It was a masterfully disguised waiver. It stated that the undersigned forever waives and releases any claim, interest, or expectancy in any family estate or trust instrument. They wanted my signature while I was still reeling from the shock of the adoption announcement. It was a classic predatory legal move. I left the pen exactly where it lay. My father, noticing my absolute calm, began to look visibly panicked. The deep red flush of anxiety climbed up his neck. He had seen the letters tear on my folder tab. He was an accountant. His brain was finally doing the math. Is there something we should know, Paige?" Wesley stammered. I smiled at him, a genuine, chilling smile. "Not yet," I whispered. Right on cue, the restaurant doors opened, and Aunt Renee walked in person, with Cousin Brett trailing behind her. They had been waiting in the restaurant bar, hiding until Diane gave them the signal to provide social pressure. "Paige, what an absolute coincidence!" Renee exclaimed, pressing her cold, powdered cheek against mine. She sat down without being asked. Brett, now 26 and still looking smug, gave me a look that said I was finally being thrown out of the family kingdom. "We just want what is best for the family estate, Paige," Renee lectured, placing her hand over my mother's. "Families have to make structural choices. Blood looks after blood." I looked at my aunt. I looked at my mother. I felt the very last thread of familial obligation in my soul snap completely loose. These were not people I was losing. These were heavy, toxic objects I was finally setting down. My father wasn't joining in on their celebration. He was staring intensely at his hands. Suddenly, under the cover of Renee's loud chattering, Wesley leaned across the table and whispered, his eyes filling with tears, "Your grandmother really did love you, Paige." I looked at him. I waited. There was a parallel universe where my father said the next sentence, the apology, the defense of his child. But my mother shot him a sharp, disciplinary glare, the way a handler controls a rogue animal, and Wesley immediately shrank back into his seat, taking a submissive sip of his water. His brief flash of courage died in his throat. I didn't hate him. You cannot hate a man for being exactly the coward you always knew he was. But I knew it was time to end the theater. I looked across the table and adopted the clinical, razor-sharp voice I use when confronting fraudulent clients at my firm. "Dad," I said clearly, cutting right through Renee's voice. "Which legal instrument did your attorney file your paperwork under? Your personal will or Nana's family trust?" The entire table froze. My mother's wine glass stopped dead in midair. Renee's manicured hand went completely paralyzed. In exactly 9 words, I had revealed 3 devastating facts. I knew there was a massive legal difference between their assets and the trust. I knew which one held the actual wealth, and I had known long enough to speak the language fluently. My mother's voice came out incredibly small, stripped of its grand authority. "What on earth are you talking about?" I didn't rush to answer. The most powerful person in any legal negotiation is the one who allows the silence to stretch. I calmly reached into my bag, opened my manila folder, and laid the 3 pages out on the white tablecloth, side by side, like corporate exhibits in a fraud case. Exhibit A, the retainer letter proving I was backed by top estate litigation counsel. Exhibit B, the certified distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, highlighting the termination date of my parents' income. Exhibit C, my certified original birth certificate, showing the name Susan Hale typed permanently in the maternal line. I didn't point. I let the ink do the screaming. I watched my mother's eyes scan the trust document. I watched her read the words, "Caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate on the beneficiary's 25th birthday. Remainder passes to Paige." I watched the color completely drain from her face, turning her skin ash white. She looked at the paper, then at Wesley, then back at the paper, praying that the text would magically alter itself. It didn't. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a gentle, lethal whisper. "You filed your paperwork against the wrong family. The one you just cut me out of was always the smaller one." It took Diane exactly 10 seconds to calculate the catastrophic damage. The historic Linden Road mansion they were living in was funded entirely by the trust. Without the caregiver distributions, they couldn't afford the property taxes or the upkeep. The steady stream of wealth that had financed their lifestyle was legally dead as of midnight tonight. The entire remainder, the true fortune, was transferring directly into the bank account of the daughter they had just officially cast out. And her clever little waiver? It was worth absolutely zero, because it renounced claims to an estate that held nothing but debt. She had aimed her expensive legal knife at a shadow and missed the mountain entirely. When a narcissist is completely cornered, they never apologize. They pivot. Diane's face instantly rearranged itself. The icy corporate mask melted away, and a frantic, artificial warmth flooded her eyes. She desperately reached across the table to grab my hand. "Paige, sweetheart," she pleaded, her voice trembling with synthetic maternal affection. "We are still your parents. Whatever legal jargon is written on those papers doesn't change who we are. We are a family. Family." The word sounded completely grotesque coming from the exact mouth that 20 minutes ago had proudly stated, "We only kept you for the benefits." I slowly pulled my hand away, leaving her fingers hanging empty in the air. I gathered my 3 pages, slid them neatly back into my manila folder, and stood up. "Sit down, Paige," my mother hissed, her maternal act instantly evaporating as the cold control snapped back. "Where on earth do you think you're going?" I held the folder securely against my chest, looked Diane dead in her eyes, and delivered the final blow. "My birth family is sitting exactly 3 tables behind you." My mother turned around in her seat. She turned with the heavy, agonizing slowness of a person who already knows the catastrophic truth and is begging her body to be wrong. Her cashmere shoulders rotated, her chin came around, and her eyes locked onto table 9. There, beneath the warm restaurant lights, stood Susan Hale, my biological brother Danny, and my fierce grandmother Pearl. They had been there the entire night. They had ordered quietly, eaten almost nothing, and watched the entire cruel performance without making a sound, exactly as I had asked them to. Susan met my mother's eyes. She didn't gloat. She didn't gesture. She simply looked at the woman who had raised her biological daughter with a calculator and a single cupcake. Then, Susan turned to look at me, and her entire face opened up like a window in spring. Danny stopped looking at his phone. Pearl had her coat already in her hand. They didn't say a single word to the Mercers. They didn't need to. Their presence alone filled the room. As I stepped away from the front table, my mother completely lost her composure. The pristine, wealthy mask cracked wide open in front of the entire elite dining room. "After everything we paid for," she screamed, her voice rising to a sharp, hysterical shriek that echoed off the high ceilings. "After everything we did for you. The private schools. the roof over your head. You humiliate your true family in public over a piece of inheritance. The entire restaurant fell into a dead silence. Patrons at the bar turned openly to stare. Aunt Renee was frantically pulling at my mother's cashmere sleeve, hissing, "Diane, sit down. Everyone is filming. Clean up your act." But Diane was completely unhinged. All she could scream about to a room full of wealthy strangers was what she had paid for. Even at the absolute end, the word love never entered her vocabulary. I didn't scream back. I didn't turn around. Susan's warm hand instantly found mine, anchoring me to the earth. I walked the 15 feet, past the wreckage of the Mercers, and arrived at table 9. Pearl took my face in her hands, her eyes fierce with pride. Susan reached down and pulled out the empty 4th chair, the chair they had explicitly asked the hostess to set, even though their reservation had been for 3. "We saved you a seat, sweetheart," Susan whispered, her eyes shining. "We always did." I sat down in that chair. It was a chair that had been waiting for me for 25 years. It was a table that wanted me purely for the fact that I existed, getting absolutely nothing out of wanting me. Danny had secretly ordered a slice of rich chocolate cake from the waiter, and he had stuck a single, bright birthday candle right in the center. "Blow it out, Paige," Susan smiled. "Make a wish." I looked at the flame, and I realized with absolute clarity that I didn't have a single wish left. I already had everything. Within a year of that dinner, Wesley and Diane Mercer were forced to sell the Linden Road estate because the trust distributions had permanently dried up. They moved into a cramped, depressing apartment outside the city limits. Aunt Renee went completely radio silent after learning that none of Nana's fortune would ever trickle down to her precious son Brett. The story of that catastrophic birthday dinner traveled through our social circles like wildfire. The narrative my mother tried to spin, the tragic tale of a devoted mother abandoned by an ungrateful, money-hungry adopted daughter, never took root. Too many people at Vanterre had witnessed the raw, ugly truth, a furious woman screaming about receipts while a calm girl walked into the arms of a family that loved her for free. I never sued them for the years of stolen subsidy money. I never posted a single call-out thread online. I simply enacted the ultimate boundary, absolute, unbroken silence. My father texted me once, 3 weeks after the dinner. 3 words, "I am sorry." No name signed, no follow-up. I never replied. He was, as always, a year too late and speaking to an empty room where his voice cost him nothing. I spent that birthday and every single birthday since at a table that lights all the candles without being asked. This has been another true chronicle from Revenge Stories. If someone in your life only values you when you are yielding a profit, take this script as your legal notice to stop auditioning for a place you already deserve. You do not have to buy your way into the hearts of the people who truly love you. Type the word boundaries in the comments section below if you've ever had to fire a toxic family member to save your own life. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who is currently sitting at a freezing table, and we will see you right here in the next chapter of Revenge Stories. Stay strong, stay safe, and let the truth do the work.